One of the questions that comes up all the time on Facebook groups, forums, and in the YouTube comment section is, what is the best light, skimmer, powerhead, whatever, for a saltwater aquarium? But the reality is that there's no such thing as best, and that all brands do certain things really well and certain things not so well. So today I'll give you my honest opinion on what 5 of the top reefing companies in the hobby do well and not so well, so you can weigh up the pros and cons of each to decide what piece of equipment suits you best. And first up, I'm going to start with Red Sea, which is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest companies in the hobby. And the best thing about Red Sea, in my opinion, is that they're very innovative. They take the Apple approach to bringing out products, in that they don't just want to bring out a new product just so they can say they've got one the same as everybody else. What they do is they take their time, they work on something, they develop it, they make it innovative and add really useful features, and then they bring it out. 2 really good examples of that. The Reef Mat is their filter roller. Clarity had one out for years that was fairly basic, still a good piece of kit, but it's fairly basic. And the Red Sea one has got loads of features, a really easy roll change mechanism that is probably about the easiest on the market. You can install the plumbing on both sides, you can take it apart really easily and completely strip it down for easy maintenance, and it's got a tray underneath the unit for filter media, so things like Rowaphos and activated carbon. And they've recently brought out a skimmer, of course, which has a self-leveling function that nobody else has ever brought out. So they take their time, they bring out good products, and they think about ways they can improve on traditional designs. The worst thing about Red Sea is that they don't put much effort into making things compact, and so their equipment is quite large. The skimmer and the Reef Mat are the best examples of that. Their skimmers are roughly double the size of the Deltec skimmer that I have for my tank, and it takes up a load of space in your sump. And the same goes for their filter roller, the Reef Mat, which is about twice the size of the Clarity and the Reef Factory options. And we're going to move on to the next company, which is Ecotech. And I think the best thing about Ecotech is that they know what they're good at, they do it very well, and they don't try to have a product to tick all boxes. So they only have a few products in their range, and as a general rule, they bring it out and they don't mess around changing it. The exception is the Radion lights, which they tend to upgrade every 2 years. And when they do that, actually, occasionally they have teething issues. They had noisy fans on the most recent Radion that they brought out. But because they don't change all the other products, they don't get any issues with that. And it means that everything is tried and trusted. The MP40s are a fantastic example of that. They've been around for absolutely years, and the only upgrades they've made in probably the last 10 years, about 8 years ago they introduced the quiet drive option, which made it a much quieter pump, and probably about 4 or 5 years ago they started including Bluetooth chips to make it compatible with Mobius. Apart from that, they haven't really changed it, and that's great because it's a winning formula. You've got thousands of people with years of experience, and you know it's going to work. So what's the worst thing about Ecotech then? Well, quite simply, for me, it's the price. They don't try to operate in the budget end of the market, of course, and most of their products are probably at the premium end of the pricing range. Best example of that is the MP40. It's a really expensive pump. I believe it just peaked at just over £400 here in the UK, which is a hell of a lot of money for a powerhead of that size. And while it is a really good piece of equipment, given that all of the R&D costs are long gone out the window and they've long been covered, it's a little bit of a shame that it's still so expensive, and it's a sort of thing that I would expect to come down over the years, and I suspect they make quite a lot of profit on that compared to some of their other products. Moving on to company number 3, and now we're going to talk about Reef Factory. Now, the 2 best things about Reef Factory, in my opinion, are firstly the app, which is absolutely fantastic. It is the best app in the saltwater aquarium hobby by an absolute mile, in my opinion. Really easy to use, really intuitive, and really nicely laid out. And the other great thing about Reef Factory is they have a product to cover pretty much all bases. So you could probably almost set up a tank completely just using Reef Factory equipment, with the exception of a skimmer and a powerhead, and they are working on skimmers and powerheads, so that will soon change. And that means that you can have all of your equipment in the tank under one app, and that app just happens to be the best in the hobby as well. So what about the worst things about Reef Factory then? Well, I think there are 2 things. Firstly, the build quality of their equipment isn't really up to the same standards as their software, and it can feel a little bit flimsy. And secondly is actually something that's connected to the good thing about Reef Factory, in that they have a really wide product range. While it's great that you have loads of different pieces of equipment that you can have all under one app, The downside of that is that they can feel sometimes like a bit of a jack of all trades and master of none. That's a little bit unfair because some of their products are really, really good, so they're a master of some things, that's for sure. But I tend to find that when they bring out a first generation piece of equipment, it's missing a few features, or isn't quite as well built, or isn't quite as good as the second generation piece of equipment they bring out. So sometimes you're better off with Reef Factory holding off when they bring out a new piece of equipment and waiting for the second gen bit of kit to come out. And the penultimate company I want to talk about is Jecod or Jebao. And I think there are two really good things about Jecod in particular. One is that the performance, bearing in mind they are one of the cheaper brands in the hobby, the performance of their equipment is pretty much equal to any of the premium brands. And what I mean by that is if you only have Jecod powerheads in your tank, your corals will be just as happy as if you only have the £400 Ecotech MP40s. So in terms of performance, return pumps and powerheads, they do an absolutely fantastic job. And in fact, Jecod prioritise silence, so their return pumps are quieter than many other more premium manufacturers, including Ecotech. So what are the bad things about Jecod then? Well, perhaps inevitably for a budget company, build quality isn't exactly great. The control boxes feel quite cheap, and the devices themselves are not exactly rock solid. And also I've found that when you unplug the control box, if it's still turned on at the wall, you get a spark, which you don't get from any other company. The other bad thing about Jecod is functionality tends to be fairly limited. So you can have different power modes. For example, you can have pulsing wave modes and random modes on the power heads, but you can't set them for different time schedules, so they ramp up and down at certain points of the day. It's either on wave mode or on random mode, full stop. Now, I don't think your corals are going to mind that, but we reefers love messing around with things like that. So if you really like functionality, Jecod probably isn't the way to go. And the last company I want to talk about is GHL. Now, GHL is pretty much the market leader in terms of build quality, and that is the best thing about them. I've had many dosing pumps over the years from various different brands, and the best quality one by an absolute mile was my GHL dosing pump. For a start, it feels really solid and all metal construction, and it looks really smart, but also it's really well built and really cleverly designed. So on that one, for example, you had variable speed heads, which means that you can run them very slowly if you need to dose trace elements, or you can run them much faster if you need to dose calcium and alkalinity, which you tend to dose a lot more of throughout the day. And also by adjusting those speeds, you adjust the sound, so they're much quieter at the lower speeds. So in terms of build quality, GHL have got it absolutely licked. But what about the bad things about GHL? Well, the worst thing about GHL is quite simply the software. If you've had GHL equipment for years, you've probably got used to it, and so it's not so bad. But when you're coming into GHL, the software is really difficult to get used to. It's very unintuitive, and you have to do an awful lot of menu diving. The menus aren't really labeled very well, and there are all sorts of technical issues that I had anyway, and that I think are pretty common, that even though the GHL Run forum is really helpful, sometimes it can take quite a few steps going back and forwards to get it fixed. So the hardware is absolutely fantastic, but the software, not so much. So that is my opinion on what the best and worst things about those particular companies are. But if there are things that you think I've missed, things that you love about companies, or things that you hate about them, let me know in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more Reef Talk extra goodness. And until next time, happy reefing.